So I'm very excited about this. We have a panel, and I always think panel discussions are very interesting and enjoyable because you get to get people's real thoughts, and they get a little more surprises. So we have a pretty awesome panel here. BigBear is a company you guys might have seen. They recently went public. They do a lot in cybersecurity, AI, machine learning. So when we were first starting this conference, I reached out to Zach, and I said, like, do you guys want to present? And we came up with the idea with a panel. So we have 3 experts. I'm going to do a brief introduction, and then we'll go through a list of questions. And I really would like to get questions from you guys. So as we get closer to the end of the questions I have, feel free to line up and ask some questions. Definitely anything you want to know about, machine learning, cybersecurity related, things like that, okay? So Zach Casper is the Senior Director of Cyber and Engineering at BigBear. He has spent the past 21 years supporting the U.S. intelligence missions. I've known Zach for several years, and I would say he's one of the smartest guys I've ever worked with. He does a lot with CNO, embedded development, machine learning, data science, cybersecurity. So he's definitely an expert in the field. Great person to know. So I would say after the panel, definitely run up and try to get his business card. Leon is the Director of Maritime at the BigBear AI, where he works closely with the company leadership and external customers, managing requirements and projects for maritime solutions. So that's a new area I don't know much about, so maybe you can go into some details about that. And then Sammy is Sammy Hamilton, sorry about that, is the data scientist at BigBear, currently embedded as the technical lead of one of BigBear's leading predictive analytics solutions. And she spent the last couple years supporting the U.S. intelligence community and Department of Defense. So with that, I'm going to jump right into questions, okay? So let's get started with AI, machine learning, and deep learning. And the question really is, how do you guys know when to use, machine learning, AI? What are some of the differentiating factors that are used to determine what the solution? And you can answer that as to in general, or you could say, in my use case is this what? So I'll start with you, Sammy. You're right next to me.
All right, thank you. So when we have an existing client come to us, or we have an RFP or a call for white papers, someone has a problem, and we're thinking about how we can bring AI or ML to solve the problem. Usually the biggest issue isn't, does technology exist to solve this problem? There usually is always an algorithm that we know about, or a method that we can use to apply to the problem. And it's not even, do we have the right people to solve this problem? Do we have experience solving this type of problem? Especially in the defense industry, the problem is usually, does the data exist to help us solve this problem? And sometimes we'll get in there, we know what algorithm we want to use, we have the people who have experience to do this, and we get in front of the customer and they're like, okay, did you solve the problem? We're like, well, you haven't given us any data. We need data to learn from. It has to be usually correct and complete in order for us to have a chance to solve the question that they're asking. One of the problems I faced semi-recently was we were doing topic modeling, right? Take a document, tag it with one of 20 plus topics. It can have one topic, it can have 6 topics, and then move it to the next step in the pipeline. And they said, yeah, we have over 400,000 documents for you to use. And they classified problems, so transfer learning wasn't going to be a great solution, but we were confident we could solve this problem. We start decomposing the problem, get the algorithms ready, and they're like, oh, we only have 11 correctly tagged documents. Out of 400,000, we have 11 that you can use that are right. And there was a lot of frustration when we went back and said, this is not going to work. We need to sit down with your analysts and have them help us teach the algorithm, because 11 documents that can have 6 of 20 different topics, it's just not going to work. So a lot of times that is the limitation, and we spend a lot of time informing our customers, informing especially the defense industry, that don't throw that data away. Make sure you're doing it right the first time, so that when we go to apply these complex solutions, we can have success.
What about you, Leo?
Yeah. Spinning off that, big data problems are always a good option to leverage machine learning to try and make sense of the data, identifying patterns and trends, particularly in maritime. AIS is a really good, solid data set to do that. It's global, it's standardized. There's a lot of it. Hundreds of millions of records a day. And it's really hard to make sense of even just visually sometimes. So identifying patterns in there, looking for anomalies, problems like that, even outside of maritime, right? Any type of data that is just too big and unwieldy to deal with on a manual basis, using machine learning algorithms are good
So
solution for that.
I'm going to give you a chance to answer, Zach, but actually, because for my education, can you give me an example of a maritime problem that you're working on? I think like even when you answer to Zach, kind of give some context. Like you talked about a lot of data. What's the type of data you're dealing with? What are you trying to solve in the maritime?
Yeah, so a good problem to point out would be identifying dark targets and their activity. So a dark target is a vessel that is not beaconing their AIS when they probably should, based off international maritime law. And a way that you can do that is you can look for other signatures aside from a beaconed or an AIS signal that's been beaconed by that vessel, such as RF data from the radars, their navigational radars like Furuno. Or even using a visual collection method using computer vision that has been captured from satellite imagery. So whether it's a dark vessel for illicit fishing, like Chinese fishing vessels fishing in an area they shouldn't be, or smuggling of some type of illicit material or weapon or something like that. A TTP, technique and procedure that an illicit actor might use is to turn off their AIS when they don't want to be identified. So using other data and using space and time to correlate those tracks to then determine if you need to focus on that vessel.
What about you, Zach?
It's a good example. So the go back of when you select AI, ML, DL, right? Those are relatively new topics for kind of the area I grew up in. 21 years doing offensive cyber. I finished my undergraduate degree during the recent AI winter, right? And so it was the massive innovation and advancements within compute fabric, data storage, and of course, internet speeds, to be able to transfer data that's enabled all the recent innovation, with application of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So I like to use augmented intelligence. I know some other speakers kind of, dance around with the other A terms because I don't see it as artificial. I see it as something that has to enable and kind of perform an effective human-machine teaming operation because we got to keep that human in the loop, at least for the domain space that I'm in. So I see all of those as tools in my toolbox, right? And recent tools, right? We know how to solve the offensive and defensive cyber missions manually. And so we need to kind of crawl, walk, run. And we need to start with automating as much as possible, right? DevOps, DevSecOps principles into kind of those pipelines. But as we get more sophisticated in those solutions, we need to start applying new terms that bring a new collection of technology and processes like ML ops to where, oh hey, we've got this new thing that can help automate that or intelligently automate this a bit more. And oh, by the way, we actually do have good data sets. What unique things can our data scientists, who I work with, day in and day out to kind of do really cool things like kind of the freakonomics style, right? So I see it as a new tool in the toolbox that we can reach into when it makes sense, and we're doing so.
So do you? You mentioned the augmentation, and I was just curious. Do you feel that in the national security area that there's a difference between data science and machine learning and deep learning that's done commercially versus national security? Is there more checks and balances? Is there more concerns? Is there more issues with the data? What do you think, Sammy?
I think a lot of at least what I have seen recently is everybody wants AI and ML, right? They want to solve their hardest problem with AI and ML, and while it's but one tool in the toolkit, sometimes you just need data literacy, data cataloging, data analytics that are good to solve a problem. And then, if we have a problem that we do apply AI and ML to, it's all well and good in the R&D space. We've proven it on a test data set or old data, and it works really well, but there's this big hurdle between development and then those decision makers in the defense space putting it into production, because the stakes are much higher than they would be like in the commercial realm. We're talking dollars versus, national security, right?
So are they wanting AI knowing what that is, or they just want it because they read it on the internet?
A little bit of both.
A little bit of both, that's fair.
I'll give it a little bit of both, yeah.
What about Leon, La Maritime? I mean, I'm just not as familiar with that space. Do you find they understand what they're asking for? Do you want me to skip that question?
Yeah, let's pass on that one.
Okay, that's fair. So what about so you mentioned the stakeholders. Actually, I'll rephrase the question. How about that?
Okay.
Do the stakeholders, or the stakeholders understanding AI and machine learning and deep learning at a level where they can convey the requirements to you and that you can act on that, or do they come with like, I just know I need AI?
Yeah, I think it's a little education process. They look to us as the experts and create solutions that will help them solve their hard problems. And sometimes like Sammy said, it doesn't require, machine learning or any type of artificial intelligence to get there. It just requires that they manage their data better, maybe some analytics, and some other sense making. But yeah, no, we are looking to employ it where it does make sense. And also at the same time, it's on us to educate, our customers and, the government on how to, on the application, on what smart application of ML and AI.
Yeah. I was going to say, RPA comes to mind, right? Robotic process automation, like UiPath and stuff, which is an AI adjacent technology. It's pure automation, right? So that goes a long way before actually having to reach into the toolbox and train and then deploy models, right? But back to your first part, you asked about the data, right? There is a huge challenge right now of models in the open source community, and I love how AI and ML have so much open source free stuff available for education and prototyping and full-on solutions, but we're a bit fragmented at the moment, right? We're trying to figure out how to mature those. But if you just grab a model that's pre-trained on data out in the wild and then pull that into a classified space and put it in inference mode and expect the same performance, and as it's monitored, you're likely not going to get it, because those models are not trained on the very specific data sets that they need to be, because they're not available typically in where there's training environments are. So there's a bit of a gap there that isn't a new problem, right? There's other less mature technologies and things that kind of have to understand and operate in those conditions, but that's a big problem right now.
So that leads to a question we had a little later, but I want to jump to it. Metrics and success. Like, how are you measuring success then? Like, if you're not able to do some of those things, how do you know when you actually are successful? Do you have tricks? Do you have tools, techniques that you're using? And then last part, and I'll let you talk. Is there anything unique to the national defense space for those metrics, right? Because I think on the outside, we can all look up certain KPIs that people are looking at, but what are unique to the national defense? And Leon, I'll skip you and go with Lee.
Yeah. So how are we measuring success in the defense space?
Well, however you want to measure, and any of your use cases. I'm just curious. Like, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. From the BigBear side, I'd say we've had quite a bit of success with our vein product, right?
Yeah, it's different for every project, right? And it usually is like that for the commercial space as well. What question are you trying to answer? What is your, do you want high accuracy? Do you want low error? Do you want, less false positives? Whatever problem you're trying to solve, everyone usually has their idea of what is it good enough for me to go into, take it and actually like make decisions or put it into production. I'm going to circle back to that hurdle of getting it into production. From my perspective as a data scientist trying to bring these new methods into the defense space, it's when we get something into production and it's being used with the way we intended it to be used. It is augmenting intelligence. It's helping make decisions. It's enabling, from the fire hose of data, the subject matter expert can now focus on what they're meant to focus on. That to me is success. It's not necessarily a given metric. It's they're using the technology we put in their hands to complete the mission, right? And that's, I think, specific to the defense industry.
Yeah.
And to add to that, and I think the stuff we're doing with defense, it's about innovation as well, right? It's about taking some of their older systems and bringing them a little bit more into the future or the present. Taking their relational database and turning it into graph, right? So we can then run different analytics on it and get more insight from the same data. Speeding up their systems, lower latency and stuff like that. So it's more qualitative than it is quantitative, in that we help them solve a hard problem through our innovative processes.
Yeah, it sounds like you're running into a lot of issues that go beyond just applying a machine learning algorithm, right? You talked about data quality, you're talking about legacy systems and updating that. What about you, Zach? I mean, are you seeing anything in the metrics or?
Yeah, it's speed for me. I think that's the biggest measurement that both if I'm wearing the defensive hat or offensive hat. Defensively, right now, it's 180 days, approaching 200 days that 0 days can exist in a network before they're detected. So if augmented intelligence solutions are able to detect that faster, that is a win, and we will continue getting faster. The choke point there for the defensive operations as 4G, 5G in the future roll online for wireless communications and data throughputs, and then wired communications where gig E, 10 gig, et cetera. The network appliances that have to actively monitor in real time are choking, right? So we're constantly playing a cat and mouse game of other areas in technology evolving at the pace necessary to deploy intelligent solutions, right? So that's a defensive hat. If I'm putting my offensive hat on, it's producing tools that allow tool developers to produce more tools faster, right? And that again is the classic, Tom and Jerry cat and mouse game that manually we can't do it. So we need to use AI to accelerate our ability to build, a solution against a technology target that needs to be deployed in theater, right? And that's, I think the DoD, Cybercom and the service cyber components are adopting that a bit faster, at least in the RFIs and the market surveys and in the proposal requests coming out. Everyone's aware of the problem. They seem to be trying to get ahead of it in how they're eliciting industry.
I was thinking about what you were saying. I was trying to keep up with you, honestly, Zach. Can you go back to the defensive? Similar to what I asked Leanne, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, because give me an example of where you're seeing AI, ML applied to the defensive side. What are, as much as you can say, right?
Yeah.
Can you put a little more to it?
Yeah, that's the easier one to talk about, right? Because more press, more sophisticated, the recent ransomware attacks, right? You had Colonial Pipeline, JB Meat Packaging, and some other ones, right? And those were detected not so fast, right? I think one of them was due to the SolarWinds kind of issue, and that had been in that network for quite some time before being detected, and FireEye was in the mix and stuff like that. So you guys can go read about all of that, but from a defensive standpoint, it's just a speed. We are constantly, for any of the ML-infused next-gen network appliances that are able to begin doing some of this real-time threat monitoring and threat detection at line speed, they're being trained on arguably old data, right? Because it's data that's already come on the wire. PCAP and network traffic and the associated log files and NetFlow and all of that are constantly evolving, right? And so we need to kind of have a good feedback loop to monitor and routinely retrain our deployed models and algorithms to try to keep pace with how the landscape of data transfer looks like. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. But even in those cases, you guys, I think Sammy said this, and at least you keep on saying augmentation, right? It sounds like there's still hesitations to let these systems go and just
100%,
right?
Yep. There's and you guys can jump into, but there's removing the human from the decision loop is likely not to happen for some time.
Yeah.
We do need to get to a point for known threat vectors to kind of be auto-neutralized, right? There's got to be a quick speed, feedback loop there to detect, neutralize, and then perhaps notify, right? Maybe they go into kind of a DMZ zone, so to speak, and then alert the human operators or threat monitors to kind of investigate. But I don't see the human being removed from that loop anytime. I think we've got to build trust in these systems.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing. There's got to be a sufficient time that goes by where the human-machine teaming has such a trust relationship that there's a high level of confidence in there, and right now we're just not there yet.
You're shaking your head a lot. You want to add something?
Yeah, I do. I don't want to take your pyramid
Yeah, do it.
visualization, but you have like a pyramid of sophistication for like AI and ML solutions, where you can think of the bottom tier as just like automation or augmentation, right? Where doing something manual that could be done by a person and probably is just a series of rules, right? This is data that I don't care about, so don't show it to me. And this is data that's interesting, so show it to me so I as a person can make a decision or perform an action. And then like at the top of the pyramid, you have auto ML and deep learning and things that can make complex decisions or do other things. Mm-hmm. And then the personal layer that I've put below that is like the data literacy, data cataloging layer, right? Where you have a solid data foundation, then we can start augmenting and automating, and then we can kind of walk up that pyramid to get to those more complex things. And I think the defense space, I think, is right between those first two layers. Like we're finally getting solid data foundations, people understand what they want from data, they understand how to interact with it, and now we can start, doing the automating and augmenting, or it's instead of drinking from the fire hose and having to, for like a media awareness perspective, and instead of having to read all the tweets, mm-hmm. I can focus it and read just the tweets that are of interest to me, and then I can continue to analyze and morph that in with the other data. So I think we're getting there, and that's the same in the AIS space, right? Instead of looking at all of the potential shifts, we can identify and kind of filter that down.
Yeah, and defense, we've got a data problem, right? We've got too much of it. Can't make sense of it. We don't have enough humans to do PED on ISR, right? So processing, exploitation, dissemination. Kind of a newer case of employing machine learning is on the edge, right? So intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, ISR, you have sensors out there, whether they're on, in a pod on a drone, or they're floating in a buoy in the ocean, or, they're at some unattended ground sensor hidden and look like a rock, right? You don't want to pipe back all of the data because you got bandwidth issues with regards to exfil on the data. You have just a bunch of white noise that you don't really care about, right? So deploying, building training models, and then deploying those models on edge devices, and then having those send back just what is flagged as relevant, right? Is highly important to the world that we're going to live in the future, that we're in right now, with regards to all these different IoT devices and sensors that are out there.
So are you seeing that now, or is that where you're seeing these going? Like, are the sensors actually out there now that are doing the edge computing on these kind of things?
Yeah, they are, right? Like from an R&D standpoint, that a lot of work has been done on that in the recent past years. End-to-end solutions, I think we're still working on that, right? I think you'll start to see in Department of Defense, programs of record will start to pick up more end-to-end solutions with regards to that.
Is there a concern with the IoT and the edge sensors that we'll never keep up with the data, so we're always, that seems like it's going to be even more of a problem. You said there's already too much data, that's going to be more data. Are you seeing solutions? I mean, you kind of addressed it, do more at the edge, but are you seeing solutions that are actually solving that are reducing the data as it's coming back? Are you working in that area? I guess it's kind
of... I'm personally not involved in any of those at BigBear, and I don't know if you guys can jump in and talk to any edge compute.
Yeah, we're going that direction. I'm not working in edge compute, but I get an embedded systems background, right?
Yeah.
So that convergence is likely coming. Are you guys doing edge devices at the moment?
No, it's been a big, as we're responding to these call for white papers, question and answer sessions that the defense industry holds, that is exactly what they're interested now. Is we've seen bits and pieces of what AI and ML can do for us, maybe at the strategic level or the operational level, but now we want to get it down to that tactical level where the warfighter can have these great tools in their hands on the edge, like in the mobile vehicle or in the backpack or wherever they are. So kind of moving in that really modernized direction.
Yeah, that connectivity piece is still the big challenge, right? You don't have real good resilient networks in theater typically, right? Or high bandwidth links, right? So of course 5G is going to enable it, but even there's dark zones for that. So if you compare that to the Amazon Echoes, Google Homes, all the IoT devices and smart hubs in our homes, right? They're always connected. So when you talk to one and it goes back to the cloud, processes it, and just sends, they're kind of dumb devices, so to speak. Your edge compute devices for strategic and tactical missions can't be just dumb devices because they're not connected. They have to be able to do something on their own without that connection back to the hive, so to speak, right? Yeah. But then when it reconnects, how do you take what it figured out and sync that back while also getting new pre-trained models down and do that kind of equivalent to an rsync across hundreds of thousands of devices? That's a big challenge right now.
Yeah, definitely. So you said something. I'm going to pivot away from this a little bit. You said the word white paper, and I was kind of curious. Are you like where is the government looking for solutions? Like, what are some of the innovative areas that you're seeing in white papers? I mean, we've talked about edge computing, we talked about IoT, and some of those. What other problems are you seeing that people could be like, oh, that'd be an interesting area to work, or that's where I should learn? You can go first, since you said white paper. And you're closest to me, so I'm just
I think it's a huge space, right? We, as a large company, struggle to find the ones that we want to respond to because there's so many cool things that we have many smart minds do. We're like, oh, I'm really interested in this, I'm really interested in this. Some of the areas that I've recognized are causal relationships and causal forecasting, right? We can all forecast and do correlative relationships, but that causal, the defense industry wants to know, did this cause this? What would the effect be? And those are very loaded words in the data science realm, right? They want to know for sure. And that is, I think, an area that's still being developed, especially as it applies to those problem sets. So that, at a personal level, is what I see as an area for growth, but I'm sure there are, you just finished writing a long proposal about machine learning applications for the cyberspace. Yeah,
they're asking for a lot, and I think that's part of the problem. We can't boil the ocean, right? We talk about this a lot, but I always refer to it narrow AI, right? We can go in and solve very specific problems where we understand very well. We have data or access to data to make that solution and then solve it, right? And then, the next step is integrating that and productizing it, getting it in the mission space or delivering it. But that's got to be a repetitive process because we can't do all of this, but we can keep solving individual slices and do that very well. So to roll back around, stakeholders need to probably couple what you said. It's as much of an education campaign to teach them what this new generation of technology can do today, what we think it can do tomorrow and in the future, and then stage it appropriately. That way there's no miscommunication or misunderstanding what's going on, right? I mean, I love all the Hollywood movies all day long, right? But they don't accurately represent the reality of technology today, but that's sometimes what people are seeing or something, so. Yeah.
What about in your space? Are you seeing any?
Yeah, on the DoD side, seeing a lot of requirements right now for end-to-end machine learning environments that are all open sourced because they're tired of the black box. Yeah. They're tired of the companies that come in there and have proprietary solutions so they can lock in a long-term customer. So they want to see all of this open source code that is end-to-end environment where they can, or a different prime or sub can jump in at any time and take over, and the government owns it. Which is understandable.
Yeah, and explainable AI, right? I don't know, I didn't hear any of the speakers mention that today, but that's a huge issue right now. We get a win, it solves the problem, and then you've got to document it so your customer can trust it, right? You got to build that trust campaign. But if you can't explain how it's working effectively, no one's going to have the confidence to deploy that.
I mean, going back on that, is there issues with like ethical, like we had talked earlier about ethical concerns about, let's see, how did you word it? Is there a potential for bias that's kind of like, are we seeing bias in this kind of space with the AI?
It's the data, right?
Yeah, it's actually, as we were discussing this, we actually got into like a very heated conversation in our pre-talks. So one of the things we currently do is we have, one of the algorithms we use frequently is inductive, right? So you just pass it a bunch of data and it doesn't understand the semantic meaning of the data categories or the measures. And you don't say this is dependent on this or this is a relationship. It just takes the data, learns relationships and says, here's what I found out, which we've had a lot of success with, right? Because it cuts out that human bias, right? It says, hey, I found something that may surprise you, right? Maybe you had no idea that these things were related. Or maybe it confirms your preconceived notions. So those things that you thought had a relationship indeed do. So it, in a sense, learns things about the world through the lens of the data, not the lens of a person, which is great until the data itself has the bias in it. And we apply these machine learning models to the data so it can learn from the data. But what do you do when the data itself is reflecting of those human or cultural bias that we're trying to wiggle out of? Mm-hmm. Then it becomes like almost like a three-pronged problem. We have the human is biased, the model is biased, the data is biased. How do we start to even solve that problem? And this is like what we were trying to wrap our heads around is like, do we change the model? Do we choose a model that's perhaps more explainable? Do we go to the subject matter experts to try to adjust some hyperparameters or maybe resample? Or Leon, you were talking about how to do data gathering in a way that was ethical, and it's just I don't have an answer to the problem, right? It's such a challenging problem. It's at the forefront of everything we do right now.
Yeah, and the facets, there's too many.
So what is the, I guess, sorry, I'm going to push back just a little because I want to understand, what is the bias that you're seeing from the national defense side? Like, where's the, like, I've read the stories and I understand the concerns when you look at the commercial, like mortgage applications and things like that. That's something I think everyone's probably seen about. But can you talk a little bit about where you're seeing the national defense? And if not, you can say no and I can just skip.
So from the data perspective or from the human perspective?
Both, either. However you want to answer it, Sammy.
Okay, so I'll come from the human perspective. So as we bring, again, this inductive model, we're saying, oh, there's a relationship here. These things are related. If you're going to make a decision to achieve this outcome, here are the things that you could potentially adjust. And we have, sometimes analysts are like, oh, that's a spurious relationship. There's no way. And I'm like, the data itself has shown that these are like, take it or leave it. And that's where we have that human-machine teaming. Like, we know the data. The analyst is the subject matter expert. And sometimes it's just trying to get the analyst to trust in the data that they brought to the table that we applied the algorithms on. And that can be a challenge, again, to get over that hump, to have them get it into production and really use it. I'll stay silent on from the data side perspective. You guys have? Yeah,
from the data perspective, we're never really going to know, what bias is in the data unless it's a completely controlled environment, right? Like we have all the data that we know that we're going to get from this particular environment, right? A lot of times, whether it's collecting text data off of the internet or, social media is streaming in and, oh, we got all the Twitter, right? Like that still isn't all of the data, right? Mm-hmm. So there's always going to be bias in data. It's really, really hard to measure what that is. So the best we can do is the best we can do, I guess.
Yeah, I guess once you observe and, notice it, right? There's something measurable, observable that is telling you that way. Attempt to tune it, new strategies in tuning or filtering that out. But those are, I don't know.
Yeah, you mentioned something about ensembling different algorithms together.
That's right.
To try and make sense of the data and understand where the gaps were. Yeah, that's a potential method, is have multiple models and just hope or run them all and hope that as you ensemble them together, they counterbalance each other out if
one is biased in one direction and one is biased in the other. But I think that really boils down to, after we have achieved that success metric, whether it's, again, like the error rate or the accuracy or whatever, when we were like, yes, we did it, we've predicted the thing, we've classified the thing, is making sure that after we have that success, the data scientists and the subject matter experts are analyzing the results and looking back at the data and making sure we understand how we got from A to B. So we're analyzing each step in the pipeline to say, okay, does this make sense? Let's look at it through all these different lenses and make sure that we are, to the best of our ability, ensuring that that pipeline itself is ethical and as ethical as we can make it, given what we have control over.
Yeah.
So I got a couple more questions, but if folks want to start lining up, if they have questions, feel free, and then I'll go back and forth. So just go to the mic. You talked about the bias in data, but what about like an adversary intentionally manipulating the data? Like, how are you guys developing systems and counters to make resilient to that? Is that even a problem? Like, is that, to me, that feels like that would be a big problem, but is that a problem? Leon, do you want to go on that?
Yeah, so there's actually been a lot of R&D over the past few years in fake news and manipulation and deception in media to try and identify it, try and use machine learning to train data based off of known, right? Whether it's bots just trying to proliferate, some deception information, or if it's, a bad actor or state-sponsored news outlet. So there's been a lot of work put into that, and yes, it's very much a problem to do that at scale, right? In small scale, like it's not too difficult to do it manually. You know the problem set, you read it, you're like, hey, that doesn't make any sense, But yeah, I'd say that there has been a lot of work, especially after the Russian intrusion of the 2016 elections, and that being a big problem for the U.S. government.
Did anyone else?
Yeah, we could pivot there. I was just going to say that the model poisoning topic is fascinating, so we could probably spend an hour on that, but yeah.
Well, maybe that's what your question is. What's your question?
My question's a little bit vague because I understand it's hard to give direct answers. Mel Sparks, I'm a part of the intelligence community. I was wondering if you could speak more on what echelon you've made it to with your products, or what you're really aiming for. You mentioned specifically that you're trying to get something so that the end user can be the warfighter, and I want you to talk more about it because in my experience, working with CPOP and DSIGs, my bosses basically hit both spectrums where they're like, we want to be totally network integrated, but we also need to be able to operate in an electronic warfare, cyber denied environment. So I'm also working on giant map board acetate with the map markers out, doing the analog analysis. And I was wondering, okay, well, how are you trying to bridge that gap? Or if you could just speak more on what products you're trying to make at what echelon.
So I can talk from the current project I work on. We initially designed it for the high-level strategic. Country actors are doing things. What can we expect them to do? What will happen? And as we, walk through some use cases, it's like, okay, how can I get this at the tactical level? How can I understand not courses of action over the next 5 years, but courses of action over the next 5 days? Especially with the surge of the information operations domain being such a thing, right? You can watch it unfold on Twitter and then a day later watch it unfold in the nation's capital. The problem is the data. We can't do things at that echelon if there's not data at that echelon. And then also the problem is data at that echelon is much larger because you're following it you're following it much closer. So that is absolutely where we're trying to go, and it's a teaming between us and between whoever we're working with to find or wrestle that data out of wherever it is, or start gathering it so that we can then apply our methods or our expertise to the problems at that level. And we're getting there. We're working on a maritime use case that is absolutely at the tactical level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and back to some legacy, BigBear AI, one of the companies that was merged together to make BigBear AI, has products and services, and now we have products and services across the intelligence community and DoD. Some of them you're probably even familiar with by their government names, but these products in particular are they're managed by national agencies and then provided as an enterprise solution down to whoever has access to them, right? You know, it might be on JWICs, some might be made available on CIPRNet. So it can be very tactical, the data collection and the products that come out of that data collection, and sometimes the insight as well. Sorry for being vague with that. You want to talk offline afterwards, maybe we can get a little more of the details on that. I came to BigBear last year. Before that, I was 14 years as a Department of the Navy civilian, running operations at a Naval Special Warfare Command that provided intelligence reachback support to deployed Navy SEALs and other special operators. And we were a consumer of BigBear products. And the work we did was very tactical. But like I said, the data and the products were managed at a agency level and then provided as an enterprise solution. I hope that helps to answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I apologize because this is probably going to be a difficult question to answer, but I'm curious on all your takes. So you mentioned that we have to do a lot of work to educate stakeholders in the limitations of ML/AI and things like that. I think that's both at the contractor level and at the government level. I know a lot of contractor program managers, government customers, program managers who think that we can boil the oceans, as you said. So do you have any ideas for a path forward, for how we help temper expectations, educate them, things like that? And I ask for a lot of reasons. One of them is that within the last year, I saw an RFP that said that, you know, the contractor shall eliminate bias in their models. And I was like, how do we respond to that? Because we know that we can't do that, but we have to say we're going to do it, you know, things like that. And that puts us in a difficult situation.
I can take a shot. I think it starts down at the tactical level, person to person, right? You've got to identify areas where you can casually start to help fill those education gaps. And then as you are able to influence broader audiences and encourage folks to kind of broaden their education horizons and get access to resources, I think it's everybody's job to do so. I've been supporting, you know, kind of what I do out here 21 years, and you know, I didn't learn everything I needed to know in undergrad and in graduate school, and I still don't, right? There's a constant retooling that continues to happen, and I think it continues to get accelerated because we can't keep pace. No individual can keep pace with all the technologies, even within their own domain, right? And now we see the challenges with that, but focused back on to kind of what AI, ML, and DL, kind of that hierarchy can do, and what it can solve for us. I think it's everybody who understands its job to help educate those around them.
And more specifically, I think the government could hold contractor facilitated technical exchange meetings or community practice gatherings to then discuss and really scope down what it is they're trying to do. And during those would be a great time for the education piece.
Encourage them to come to DataWorks and similar workshops, right? Get that community larger, right? Get participation up.
I think a large part of the problem is that we are inundated with it. If you talk to someone who's non-technical or is not in the technological realm, they think that the world is going to be taken over by robots. My husband does metal fabrication, and we were watching Avengers: Age of Ultron. And at the end of the movie, he's like, AI is going to take over the world. And I was like, sit down, okay? It's not going to take over the world. We're not there yet. So I think it's not only education, but managing expectations. Like, that is the film industry. As a technical industry, here is where we are. Here's the realm of the possible. Here are the hard problems we're trying to solve. And I think that needs to almost be like the start of the talking point before we get into, okay, now that we understand what we can solve, let's focus on what we are trying to solve, and let's build the foundations from there.
Yeah.
Although, thank you so much. And to be fair, though, there are people within our space that are technical experts in the AI ML space that also believe in the idea of singularity, right, of an AI being able to take over the world. But
Yeah. I'm wearing my
so much.
Cyberdyne t-shirt underneath. So.
Thank you.
Hi, I think I kind of follow this educational thing, but I'm wondering, because when you talk about training, you know, with using ML, and so my question is, how much do you integrate social scientists within your technical world of data analytics to be able to understand how the training should occur? Because I looked at some data from the housing department. It wasn't, you know, the defense, but back in the 1930s when redlining was taking place, and I could see from it that the data that was gathered was very, you know, the way he would describe a particular area, I mean, in writing, how it was described, one area versus another, you could see, you know, biases coming up. And so what I'm wondering is, how does an industry like yours incorporate this bigger view of social scientists when it, you've got to train stuff, you've got to train your analytics here, or you know what you're using, your AI stuff, your machine learning. You've got to train it. So how do you bring in these other components? Because it is a problem.
I can take a stab at that. So I think key to machine learning is that you have somebody who understands the data very, very well, you know, data scientists like Sammy. And then you have a subject matter expert that knows the processes, the workflows, you know, the business practices and stuff like that of whatever the problem that you're trying to solve, right? So I'm a domain expert for BigBear AI. I'm the maritime director, and therefore when Sammy's working on a project for maritime and she needs to know how the Navy does something or how ship behaviors look, right, in AIS or in some other type of data set, I can bring that subject matter expertise to it, and together we work together to get there.
Is that the history too? The historical aspect of maritime?
Yeah, absolutely, right? Like, yeah. So it depends on what problem you're trying to solve, what data you're working with, but at minimum, and the point I'm trying to get at here is you need somebody that knows the data and can work with the data, and then you need somebody that knows the problem and is that subject matter expert to be able to work together to get to that. If you just have a data scientist and they don't know the industry space of what you're trying to solve, you're gonna have bad results.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, you've got to have multidisciplinary teams that aren't only made up of technical people in order to tease out context and intent. And it's got to be time series, because you mentioned the history of it, which I think is very important as well. So yeah, it's all about that fusion of data if you have access to all of it, right?
So we're gonna have to wrap up here. Did you have a question? Are you welcome to the mic? You're gonna be the last question. So make it a good one.
Yeah, all right. What's the meaning of life?
That was a good question. I would go with that. Yeah.
Now, So, I mean, feel free to take a stab at that if you want to. My question was, I think, mostly for Sammy. You said that you'd sometimes use different models, especially if there was some kind of bias in the data. There's the concept of wisdom of the crowd. If a lot of different people give a guess and then you take certain averages of that, you can usually get a very good answer. Do you find that to be an effective strategy, but with different models, training different sorts of patterns and paradigms, I guess, and then combining them somehow?
So operationally speaking, I will not say I've applied that methodology. So in terms of does it work, doesn't it work, right? Crowdsourcing tends to work very well in most cases. So you'd figure that ensembling the models across many different types should work well, but I don't have any empirical evidence to say, absolutely, I've used this on this problem set, and it does work. We actually have a whole machine learning research lab that is working on the ethical AI problem and that causal problem that we discussed earlier. So while I don't have an answer for you, if you come find me afterwards, we can discuss further.
Cool, thank you.
So I lied, actually, I want the last question. I like ending on a good note. I like optimism. You guys mentioned a lot of stuff. We have a lot of data. We have analysts that we have to get over the hump. We have stakeholders. I want to hear you each say, are things getting better, right? Like, are things going in the right direction? Can we be optimistic? That's kind of what I hear. You can say no, but I want to hear what you think, right? So I'm just going to go down the line, and I want to hear if you think we're getting better. Go ahead.
I say yes. As we, interacting with stakeholders, like in 2021 versus, or if it's 2022, I don't even know what year it is, versus 3 years ago, 5 years ago, it was trying to convince them that maybe this will work and we can get there, where now they're like, I want a machine learning based solution that can solve my problem. So they're, instead of being skeptical, now they're ready to at least try it, whether or not they know what that all involves, right? We've discussed that at length today, but I say it's extremely optimistic in the stakeholders wanting to adopt these practices, but also where the industry as a whole has been. And we've had huge successes inside and outside of the defense space, which I think points in good directions for us.
Okay, one for optimists. Go ahead, Leon.
Yeah, to narrow it down to the defense, I'd say, the problem I mentioned earlier with we've got a data problem, there's too much of it, can't make sense of it, don't have enough people to, exploit it. I'd say, yeah, we've made an impact on that. I think that machine learning, artificial intelligence has definitely helped make sense of big data. There's a lot of operationally deployed computer vision models in the government that is taking seemingly vast oceans of full motion video or other imagery and pointing out objects in that to say, here's what you're concerned with, focus on this, right? In addition to that, the natural language processing pipelines and employments across the DoD have helped to make smarter information out of what was just an ocean of text, right? And audio to text, and then entity extraction from there. Absolutely, I think optimistically we're heading in the right direction, and that it's only going to get better as technology increases and more machine learning algorithms get employed in DoD space.
Okay. Zach, bring it home. Your last one.
I think it's a firm yes, and I think you can easily track that by following the money. There's been a substantial amount of investment that continues to increase in AI and related technologies, and we are slowly seeing the innovative output of some of those startups and customers and organizations and open source. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's give them a round of applause.